introduction and then kind of let you run with it. Everyone, I think we all know why we're here, but I'll briefly summarize. Of course, PPFA is initiating a life cycle analysis study and then EPDs for the various products that our members manufacture. We've engaged Athena Institute to conduct the LCA study. And obviously a big part of that is collecting data from all of our processors. And that's why we're here today, to kind of kick things off and make you aware of the kinds of information that you're going to need to gather and enter into the data sheet that James and his team supplies you. We anticipate, and James, I don't want to jump too far ahead on you and put you on the spot, but following this call in the next couple weeks, you can anticipate communication with the data for you to start entering. We'll also provide some guidance on deadlines and that sort of thing to keep everyone's feet to the fire. At any rate, James is here to go through the data sheet, explain what you're going to need, offer some guidance, and address any questions that may come up. We are planning on recording this session, so hopefully it will be able to, you'll all be able to reference it at a future date. Anyway, with that, James, I'm going to kick it off to you. If you could give us a very, a brief summary of even Athena and your experience, I greatly appreciate that. And then we can go on to the meat.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Thanks for that, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Yeah, my name is James Salazar with the Athena Sustainable Materials Institute. We've got a couple of my team members on the phone on the line as well. I see Jamie Mile there, and I also believe that Hannah Renault is probably also on the line as well. I did want to just real quick run through a few slides just so I understand that some of you on the call are probably quite up to speed with what we're doing and why we're doing it. But just a real quick put some information in front of you on what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, and what are some of the market drivers before we jump into the survey. Yeah, so I'll just do that real quick. But I do want to get to the survey so we can spend the bulk of our time on that. The Athena Institute's been around for more than 20 years now. Those of you that have been involved in LCA have probably heard of us. We produce whole building LCA software called the Impact Estimator for Buildings. I think that's probably what we're quite well known for. We also work hand in hand with industry associations to develop their data, and more, I guess, in the last several years, that's involved producing industry feeds as a value-added deliverable on top of delivering producing that industry data. Athena is a nonprofit. We have offices in the United States and Canada. We're based out of Canada here, those of us on the call. But yeah, like I said, we're really involved in LCA software, LCA standards, and also developing lifecycle data and PPD. For our industry clients. Everybody's up to speed with that. It's kind of an alphabet soup. Somebody trying to jump in, feel free to jump in too. If anybody wants to slow down on anything.
James, I was just going to say, I think your connection was a little jumbled for a moment there.
Okay. Well, let me know if it persists and I'll dial in. I'm on the voice over IP right now.
Okay.
But yeah, so just to give everybody a rundown, what we're going for here at the top of the chain here is an environmental product declaration, an EPD. An EPD is essentially an executive summary of a life cycle assessment. And what makes it unique, I guess, is that it's developed based on product category rules, what's called PCRs. So there's a specific set of pipe LCA rules that we're into developing this LCA data under. The LCA EPD process kind of looks like this. You first develop an LCA based on the PCR, and that's kind of the step we are now. Once those are completed, we'll actually produce the EPD documents, and then those will be submitted to a third-party verifier, at which point they'll be registered with the EPD program, and you can share them in various green building systems. I'll run through this real quick. So what we're doing here is we're gathering the life cycle inventory data, is what it's called, life cycle LCI. That's what we see on the activity data, the survey data. What we do with that is we actually scale that based on the impacts that all of this life cycle inventory data causes, calculate the results, the LCA results. And when we do that, there's a handful of results. Global warming, obviously, is first and foremost, but we also calculate a number of other results that are reported in the LCA EPD. There's definitely some market drivers for EPDs and LCA in general that we've seen over the last 10 years. Here's some internationally. But really, the big, the elephant in the room for us is the LEED Green Building Rating System. LEED has incorporated LCA and EPDs now in its last several iterations. And the rules have changed somewhat, but they're all, pretty much along the same guidelines of producing an industry. LCA and EPD will help you get materials and resources credits. We're on now to LEED 4.1, although a lot of with timelines on projects go, there's a number of projects that are still based on LEED 4, but more and more we're seeing LEED 4.1 moving forward. These standards have credits for EPDs, but they also have credits for doing what's called optimization, which is actually producing a manufacturer-specific EPD and comparing it to an industry benchmark, which producing the benchmarks in this study would allow any of you on the phone to produce your own EPDs and do that as well. So as I mentioned, the LCA EPD credits in LEED are Materials Resource Credit 2. That's what's highlighted here. And these product LCAs and EPDs can contribute up to 2 points towards that. And here's the specific credit language, not to belabor this too much, but like I said, you get credits for having an EPD, and for, in the case of you have your own EPD, in addition to the industry EPD, you can actually go for that second credit on optimization. Here's the kind of the credit breakdown for producing EPDs and what it means in a LEED project. So you can see here that producing an industry EPD and having that attributable to your products accounts for half of a product in their calculation scheme. In LEED 4.1, that has changed a little bit. Now you get actually comparable credit for having an industry EPD versus a manufacturer specific. And I jumped over this slide, and in addition to that, if you have your own EPD, you have the option to go after what's called material attribute optimization, where you can show improvement against an industry benchmark in several of the impact categories, and you can qualify for additional credits. The key to all these, though, and this is really what I want to emphasize, is that in order to get these credits and to get these benefits, you have to have participated in the industry LCA. That's non-negotiable. So we really hope that as we go through these surveys, hopefully we'll make we are always really conscious of not overburdening you guys. So if we get to, let's say, a point in the survey where you feel like, hey, this information isn't available or something like that, then we want to know about it, and potentially we actually don't need it if possible, if there's potentially a workaround. But yeah, the key here is that participation in the LCA is a requirement for claiming those credits. It's not good enough essentially if the association has done it, but you're actually not a. So I wanted to jump now into the survey. Like I mentioned, this is really the point of this call. And I want to be able to spend enough time that anybody on the line can ask questions now. But I also will provide our emails here at the end, and as Jeff mentioned, we'll be corresponding via email over the next couple of weeks and rolling these out. So once they're in front of you, if you get to it and it makes sense now while we're talking about it, often the case, and then you get it in front of you and it doesn't make sense or there's questions that arise, we're always available. Feel free to chat with us, and we can set up one-on-one sessions to go back through it, or specific questions about various data elements. And I did mention this too. We really, I guess, should stress that we're not trying to get you to, let's say, invent or create data to fill this out. We're hoping that the data that we're asking for is data that you have potentially in your information systems. Potentially it's in different locations because it hasn't, you haven't needed to put it together in this type of format. Yeah, we're hoping the data that we're asking for is stuff that isn't too much of a pain for you to get, and if it does become that, just let us know. We'd much rather have partial surveys or some estimations where possible, rather than let's say no surveys at all. Really hoping for good participation in that, and whatever we can do to make that possible, we're happy to do that. So you can see here that the survey is based in Excel. It has a number of tabs at the bottom that kind of summarize the various aspects of the data that we're going for. I think somebody's maybe should mute their line. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback there.
Yes, if you all could mute, that would be appreciated.
Anyway, I can power through, but sounds like they're wrapping it up anyway. So the other thing I wanted to mention too, before we get into the survey and some of the data that we're asking for, is we've done a number of these studies, and we treat confidentiality very seriously with Athena, because I don't think the information we're asking for is extremely sensitive, but it's certainly your data, and you have the right to expect that we keep it in confidence. And as a part of that, we actually have a non-disclosure agreement, pop it up right here, that we're going to share with everybody that's participating. It's got, essentially lays out the purpose of the data, that we're not going to use it for other purposes, and that it's your data and remains in confidence. So this is available also as a kind of a way of protection of the confidentiality of your data. I also should mention too that we're happy to do email and surveys in Excel like this, but we also have the option of sharing this in via the web. We use SharePoint quite a bit, and it's relatively straightforward to pop this survey into a SharePoint site and give you a unique login, so that, for instance, if you've got multiple people in an organization and you would like, let's say, essentially a central location, a website, if you will, to log in and enter the data that way, rather than bouncing around copies of the spreadsheet via email. We're happy to set that up too. That's no problem for us. It's really, your preference, the logistics of having the survey completed by different people in your organization. So to jump right into it, the first page of the survey is just an introduction of what it is we're looking for. And as Jeff mentioned, this project covers a lot of different products and different applications. So the first thing, on the survey that we're going to ask for is some indication of which of these products your company is manufacturing. So I don't know, the text is a little bit small on this. I can zoom in without freezing it. So the first thing we're looking for here in this drop-down menu is simply to select the products that pertain to your facility. That way we know exactly, helps us organize things on our end, and helps us know exactly what we're dealing with in the survey, what materials, and et cetera. So you can see here there's a list. This is the list of products that we're considering. So the first thing you'll do is select one of the products. So you can see I selected one of the drain pipe products. We're also aware too that some of the products we're looking at are in different dimensions, and you may very likely be producing several of them. Let's say you're an ABS drain pipe producer, and you're producing both of these products potentially. Then essentially this allows you to select multiple products that you're completing the survey for. Once you've done that, you'll go and you'll kind of work through this data collection worksheet left to right, if you will, but feel free to jump around. It's not necessary to do it in a sequence like that. But the one thing that is, the one we ask you to fill out this page first, and then over to the general tab next, because you'll see here that once I've selected some products, it actually automatically fills that out on this next page where we're starting to get in now into more detail on what those products are. So you can see before we do that though, the first thing at the top of this page is some basic contact information. We are looking for annual production data, so that is specified here that we're looking for 2019 calendar year data, if that's assuming that's the most recent year that you have data for, since we're rolling into December now. That said, if you are really on it and you have your annual data for 2020 available as of the end of the month, automated for some reason, then feel free, to give us basically your most recent annual data. So if it happens to be 2020 and that's available, fine. Typically, we find it takes a few months for companies to essentially pull that together for the previous calendar year. So we're assuming that you're probably going to be looking at 2019 calendar year. But for instance, if you're working on a fiscal year that's a little bit different than that, and it's easier for you to give us data in that format, then feel free. We're just asking that you put your start and end month so that we know what it is we're looking at. Ensuring essentially that we have a year's worth of data. So the next you'll put in your kind of general contact information, contact phone number, so that we know once we get the survey. Inevitably, we'll have some questions, so it's nice to be able to know exactly who to come back to with any questions that arise as we go through the survey on ours. And as I mentioned here, so based on the products that you entered in the introduction side, the introduction tab, the first tab on that worksheet, it'll say here now what that is. And the first thing we're asking is just a material breakdown of that product. So essentially the percentage of resins, various fillers, any sort of other additives to the product. that's where that's what we're asking for here, and we're asking for it simply on a percentage breakdown. If this, if it's, for instance, you don't want to calculate the percent, you have it, let's say, on a mass breakdown, let us know, and we can potentially, right now the survey is somewhat locked so that we keep our data in the same format. But if we need to adjust the survey somewhat to help you put your data in so you're not having to do extra legwork on your end, then just let us know. We're happy to, accommodate data in whatever format you have. So the first thing we're asking for is the actual composition of the product, so the percentage of the primary resins, any additives, etc. And that's for the product, just for the products that are part of the study. We don't need that data for every product at the facility if it's not part of the study. We're looking for just a breakdown of the products that we're looking at.
Hey, James, just a question regarding that composition. The primary component, ABS, is ABS. We don't need to break that down to like acrylonitrile, butadiene, styrene. Right?
No.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify.
Yep, exactly. We're looking essentially at what comes in your door. If you're buying ABS pellets, we don't need you to, for instance, go to your suppliers or, to go upstream and figure out any, the breakdown of the, upstream materials. But yeah, whatever is coming in your facility, that's what we're really looking for here.
You'll be using, this is Mike, that you'll be using existing resin databases that I think have been updated pretty recently. So I would expect that only to see improvements on our products compared to our previous LCI work with Franklin, which might be a good reference for the new vendor to dig through to do some comparison too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly be looking at, and if you're familiar with those previous studies, this is obviously quite similar, and it's really an update over previous work. So yeah, I should have mentioned that if those of you have participated in the past in previous studies, then it's going to look pretty familiar. To Mike's point too, that there is, let's say, updated data from the American Chemistry Council on their resins, so we have a pretty good handle on the upstream portions of this study. So the actual resin manufacturing, we've got good data on that. So we're not really looking for what we call gate to gate, what happens inside your facility. Okay. The next part of the study is looking at the total output of the facility. When we say products out, this part of it, we're really looking for products that, obviously the products that are part of the study, but really what we need here is a sense of the total production of the facility. So this may include products that aren't part of the study, where we don't need, let's say, a detailed breakdown on the previous tab, but we do need to get a sense of the total throughput of materials to the facility, because that will help us assign, for instance, the correct energy use that we're going to get at a facility level to all the various products. So, for instance, if the products that are part of our LCA study, maybe they make up 25% of your production or 75%. We need to know what that total amount is so that we're able to essentially attribute the correct amount of all the facility level flows to the product at hand. So again, here we're looking for essentially the entire list. We don't need, for instance, real detailed breakdowns here. It's really just to get a sense of the total mass, the total production of the facility.
This is Mike again. So the methodology that you use is you sort of take a look at the entire impact of the facility and then break it down to the individual products on a mass basis.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And so
yeah, we're going to be.
So the other upshot of that is that once one of these sheets are filled out, an individual company could do an EPD or an LCA on any one of the things they produce.
Well, in that respect, to do, let's say, an EPD of a particular product, we would need the exact breakdown of the materials. So, yes, as long as, let's say, it's part of the study and you've provided that information here, then essentially those two pieces of information are what would go into producing an EPD for a particular product.
Okay.
But I guess what we're getting at here on this tab is, regardless of whether it's a product that's part of our study, or let's say it's not just not pertinent to our. It's not something you'd want to produce an EPD on. It's not part of the study. You still need to get a sense of the total production of the facility. So that's really.
So basically, we would fill this out for every size that we're producing in that facility.
Yeah, exactly. And, so we've got a lot of lines here, but for instance, if you've got a grouping of, there's this total volume, total production of this kind of general type of pipe, we don't need necessarily a real specific breakdown of it. We're looking for, just total, you could even, for instance, here, put other, and then give us the total amount of the other, and we can make sense of that.
Because you're only looking for
Does that make sense?
Because you're only looking for the mass fraction of the product being analyzed versus the entire output.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So, yeah, if you say here, you list the kind of 2 or 3 main products that are part of the study, and then you've got other or a couple of other groupings here, that will allow us to say, okay, this facility produces this much tonnage in a year, and therefore when we go down to, let's say, these energy and waste, these other parts of it, the energy in particular, actually, we can say, okay, well, we're not assigning extra energy to this one product. We know that part of that went into producing these other products that weren't part of the study, and that's how we, essentially, when we're looking at this energy later, we're going to divide that by the total facility production, so that we're not, we're making sure that we're not overcounting the energy, getting the correct amount of energy per product output. Good questions, though. Appreciate that. Continuing on the output side, because what we're really looking for here is, in addition to the product's output, we're really looking to understand all of the material flows into and out of the facility. So, in addition to the products that come out, we're looking here too for waste materials. Now, when we're asking for waste, we're obviously asking for the quantity of those, but we're also asking for what happens to those. So we understand that presumably these significant portion is recycled, so that may be internally. It's mixed back in. It's not, let's say, a set or cured product. If you're able to, at that point, mix it back into your batches, then we want to know that. If it's sent externally to a recycler, that's another option. If there's material that goes to a landfill, that's another thing we're after. And if it goes, let's say, to an incinerator where they may or may not be recovering energy off that, then that's handled a little bit differently in our model too. So essentially what we're really looking for here is a detailed breakdown of the wastes that leave the facility. And if you find here there's not enough room, we can add some rows. For this one, now once we've gotten through the product output, we're again only concerned with the wastes that are associated with the products that we're really interested in this study. So if you've got another product grouping that has some waste that we're not looking at, then don't burden yourself trying to figure out the amount and filling that out for those other products. The only place we really need the product, all of the products are in this products outline. The rest of this is, we can make do with it. We can ignore additional information if it's in there, but for your sake, at this point we're back to only the products that are under investigation in the study. So in addition to understanding the fate, what happens to those, whether they're recycled or landfilled or what have you, we're also interested in the distance that those materials go to that treatment. So you have, let's say, an external recycler that these materials are getting sent to. If you can calculate the miles and tell us if it's been put on a truck and how far it's going, same goes with landfilling. Presumably landfills are much closer to a facility, so about an estimation there may be fine if you say, hey, it's 10 miles away or 20 miles away. We want to have information on this, but we're really interested too if it's going quite a distance. So if it's going to, let's say, a recycler that's hundreds of miles away, then certainly we need that information here. And the last piece of information on the output are the actual direct emissions back to the environment. So those may be emissions to air, out your stacks, or any sort of VOCs or anything like that. And also any emissions that go directly into water sources. Now, this is an area in particular where we're not expecting this section to be fully completed, and we're really looking for only the information that you have available. We're not asking you to calculate some of these if they're not already. So, for instance, if you're reporting under the Clean Air Act, if you have a document that has facility emissions, then either put the information in this sheet or you can send us those forms directly. The other point of clarity here is we're not interested in combustion emissions. So, for instance, we have data sets for things like natural gas boilers, diesel combustion equipment and boilers. And what we're really looking for here is process emissions, because our other data sets already cover those combustion emissions. So for instance, if you've got, let's say, if you happen to have calculated some of those at your facility that include things like carbon dioxide, you'll notice here that carbon dioxide is not on this list. Even though it's an air emission from every facility. And that's because we're already accounting for that in our data sources. So yeah, just to reiterate here, this part of the data collection oftentimes scares folks off, but we're hoping it doesn't, because again, we're not asking for you to derive or calculate anything that you don't already have. We're just here. We need to ask these questions in case you do have some of this available, so that you share it with us and incorporate that into our study. And we also are fully aware that a lot of these, there's a lot of extra emissions here that are probably not relevant to your facility. So that's also quite all right and common. Moving on from the output, now we're to the other side of the facility, the input side. So this part of, as soon as we get into the inputs, a good place to, in your organization, probably to go to in your company is whoever's controlling the purchases. So there's some, purchasing officer, whoever's dealing with your suppliers and essentially paying the bills, because that's where a lot of this information is going to come from. And the first thing we're looking for here are the material inputs. So the total amounts of all the resins that are used. Again, we're not only interested here in the products that are part of the study. We've got material inputs that aren't part of the study. Don't feel obliged to put those in here either. Now, if they do end up in here, they're not relevant. Again, we'll ignore them, but not causing any additional burden on them. So that may include the various resins, any other materials, additives, things like that. And also what we call ancillary materials. Essentially things that are things like packaging, any sort of machinery, lubricants, hydraulic fluid, things like that. We typically find that this part of it is less well tracked, which is quite all right because in our experience, this part of the survey is relatively minor in terms of the overall significance. Packaging and machinery, ancillary material use by your machinery, things like that are typically negligible in terms of the overall results. So don't get hung up on this section. And again, estimations are also quite all right, particularly for this section where it's not as critical that we get the exact amount. But we are asking for it, so if you have that information, definitely please share it with us. And this next part is actually probably probably the most important part of the study. Typically environmental impacts in LCA are driven by energy sources. Combustion of fossil fuels, obviously, but really all energy sources, electricity use. So in this section, we're looking for essentially your power bills totaled up over a period of time, the year, any sort of fuels that are coming in and combusted on site, etc. So that's what we're looking for here. Now, this study and the way this is laid out is this is kind of assuming that you're generally doing the same thing at your facility. If you're an extrusion operation, then you're probably, generally speaking, producing different types of pipe and bringing the materials and doing it that way. If, for instance, you have something in your facility that is quite different than that, then let's be in contact and we'll talk about, let's say, if there's a way to, I said previously that we divide everything by the total product output, not just the products that we're looking at. But if there's, let's say, a good reason that a certain type of product is more, let's say, energy intensive to produce than another type of product, then let us know about that. And potentially we can add some information here on the breakdown of energy into different materials. But our assumption going into this is that by and large, you're producing products that require roughly the same amount of energy on a mass basis, and that if that's the case, then then all we need really here is just the total for the facility for the year. And we can essentially distribute it evenly amongst the different products that you're producing. And then the last section is on water. So we're asking for any water that you're using in your facility. If you happen to track it going out as well, then let us know. If, for instance, and I'm sure this is probably not the case with most of you guys, if you're putting water back into the ground, and let's say not through a drain, through a municipal treatment, if it's going directly back into the environment in your facility, then indicate that here. And we're also, again, this is only for water that's metered. And if you've got, let's say, a well that you don't have a good handle on how much water you're actually pulling out of that well, then just indicate that here and we'll make sense. this is for essentially metered water and stuff that you have data for. Besides that, yeah, I'm happy to walk back through the study or through the survey and answer any questions. But as you do go through it, please feel free to contact myself or my colleague Hannah. Nari, you don't have to jot down these emails. We'll share slides with you too if you'd like them. But yeah, you'll have our contact information, and we have a lot of experience in obviously in going through these surveys. And if you get to a point where completing the survey is painful, we want to avoid that at all costs, and potentially we can help you prioritize data and figure out a way to make an estimation. So yeah, feel free. We really, really hopeful that if you get stuck or if you have questions, that you'll reach out to us. I'm happy to set up, like I said, one-on-one time to go through the survey and talk you through it.
Thanks, James. There is a question that came up through the chat feature about
good.
the
I haven't been following that.
NDA, and it's how will we get/execute the NDA is the question. And really the NDA is going to be between Athena and the individual companies. That's something that will ultimately come with the communication that includes the data sheets and additional information. Does that address the question? I think it does.
We're not expecting any data to go through PPFA. It would go directly to the vendor.
Right.
And
Correct.
questions would go back and forth between the two. Although they could always ask us for assistance on how to ask the question.
Absolutely. I suppose you use your judgment about what may be confidential and what may be not. We're certainly happy to try and answer any questions, but be mindful of the fact that we don't necessarily want to see your specific data.
Yep, exactly. And when you get the NDA, you'll see that it will be, there's fields in here where it'll be customized to your company, and our information's on here and exactly what we're doing with the data. So yeah, it's between ourselves at Athena and your company directly, because that's we're the ones that are handling the data.
And although that's the case, PPFA legal counsel did take a look at it and offered a few suggested changes. But James is right; it's ultimately between your companies and Athena. What other questions might there be at this time for James or for staff, PPFA staff?
What is the timing for getting this information back to you?
That's a good question. I think our expectation is that the data that we're asking for, it's really maybe a couple of days worth of effort on your time. Maybe not let's say 16 man hours, 20 man hours, but we anticipate that this will bounce around in your organization for a few days. Now, we're not, let's say, trying to push for, we don't need it back, let's say, in a week or something like that. There's no hard deadline from that respect, but we do, we want to keep the project moving forward. But I think more importantly, we find that if these things aren't addressed, when you receive them and end up, let's say, sitting there for a month, it's really easy for these things to slip through the cracks, but it's not part of your day-to-day. So we're really hopeful that once you receive the survey, that you can, block off a bit of time and go through it hopefully pretty quickly, and that we can start working through any questions. But yeah, there's no hard deadline, but I think we're hoping that we can get right after it.
And James, this is Jeff. I think staff and Athena will work together to kind of establish a deadline date when we get this initial communication out. We're not going to ask for you to have it turned around in 2 weeks. We're not going to send it out and then say deadline 2 weeks later. We're going to be mindful of the fact that it's probably going to take some planning of resource allocation to get the data, and as James pointed out, bouncing it around for different resources. So, but I think we'll have to work on sending out reminders about the deadline that we ultimately establish. Off the top of my head, I'm starting to think that maybe, I don't know, we'll give it maybe 4 to 6 weeks total from the time we send it out. But that'll take a little bit more dialogue, I think, internally. And realistically, having heard this, we'd welcome any feedback from you all about what you think is realistic. And we'll at least take that into consideration. Strong consideration, of course. There is another, by the way, you can email that feedback to me, jeffc@cmservices.com. There are a couple other questions here coming up through the chat feature. Is the survey to be filled out for a single typical facility, or should the data represent all production sites in our company making the subject products?
I think what we would ask is that you keep the survey to a single facility, and if possible, fill out multiple surveys from multiple facilities. Now, having said that, if it's impossible for you to separate data out that way, or if it's an extra burden, then feel free to fill it out in a way that makes sense. If it's, it just needs to be consistent, I guess, is the main thing. That if you're telling us on one tab that this is the energy use for all my facilities, but on the products out tab, for instance, I'm only getting the outputs from one of the facilities, well, then we're going to be not aligned well, and we're going to end up not assigning the correct amount of energy to the product. But yeah, it's really...
pick your most efficient facility.
Yeah. Yeah. And whatever, whatever facility you have data most readily available, or, staff that's able to help out, then, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Another question is level of detail needed for percent composition. Less than 1%, less than 0.5, less than 0.2.
Well, that's a good question, actually. We're technically, our cutoffs are in the 1% range. Now, that said, if you've got data that's available and can help us out with that, in particular on some of these additives, we're sure they're quite small in terms of overall percent. We're hoping that, yeah, you provide that to us. Now, let's say if you get into the parts per million, and it's not information that's readily available, then yeah, that if it's to the point of adding burden, then we don't need anything to that level of minutia. But yeah, we're hoping that if you've got a formulation that's available, then provide that to us, and then we can make a decision on our end if there's one of the inputs or one of the constituent materials is small enough to ignore. But typically, we're getting the complete formulation if possible.
Okay.
But someone could ask for a sensitivity analysis to see if it's really worth analyzing in terms of the error margins on an EPD.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And when in doubt, that's another great point too. Is feel free to contact us, and any of these questions, that or anything else, we can help you make a judgment call too.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to keep on reading these questions, James. And this is, what is the
How
scope?
can I get the chat feature here?
You know what? Some of these are being sent to me privately, I think. So,
okay.
What is the scope of our effort here? Is it pipe production only, or is it inclusive of resin production as well? And I can answer that. PPFA's role is on the pipe production side. However, James and his team are going to be taking existing resin data from ACC that's out there and applying it to the overall LCA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, are there some resins, we're fairly confident, Mike, I know you've done some research on this, and James, you may have as well, that all the resins that we might need to cover for our products, we believe have data within ACC. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, I believe that is the case. They are pretty comprehensive in their coverage. There's potentially some of the additives in particular that wouldn't be part of those data sets, but we have access to all sorts of published data from ACC and others, so we're able to essentially link the inputs to the upstream production effects.
Great. And now there is something else to state here, and this has been a topic of discussion at various committee levels and even at the board level. Now, there are some materials that we may not have at least 3 manufacturers producing, in which case we will turn to some of the existing processors and or resin suppliers or additive suppliers for help in recruiting non-members to participate in this study. So be mindful of that, especially some of you resin suppliers. I'm trying to think of some products. Mike, help me out, that we may need a few outside of the membership for data.
Things like polypropylene and things like that. We are looking at some new materials this time. The other point or question I would put out there is we probably have to do some fittings and cement analysis, and that may come under that sensitivity analysis as to whether or not you need a lot of solid data on those products. I suspect the solvent cement is so low that it disappears, and similarly, in some of the cases like PEX fittings, that probably goes away. I know we looked at this in the Franklin work, but you may have your own black box kind of analysis for those things. We did find that for DWV applications, the fittings were pretty significant and worthy of analysis because there's so much of the weight.
And yes, it is polypro in particular. I think that we will want some assistance. So any of you suppliers that are on the call today that want to assist us in finding some polypro folks, greatly appreciate your help. Just get in contact with me and Mike Cudahy. Also, there was a statement that came in through the chat that relates to kind of the timeline and effort involved. And the statement is, we just did one of these for a different organization, of course, different materials, maybe not different materials, but different sizing and applications. And it took us about a month to push this through the organization because nobody was in a hurry. So 4 to 6 weeks is plenty reasonable, is what the statement is. Just for all those of you whose heads are spinning, I think you'll find that you have all this data, and it probably will help you create some efficiencies if you don't maybe have it as organized as you might otherwise. Help you become a little more aware.
Exactly, and we find too that if there's a point person in your organization or your company that is pushing this and is the unpopular one around the lunch table, I guess on the Zoom chat now, then it can move pretty quickly. Typically on the input side, whoever your purchasing officer is probably likely to have a lot of that information, and then you may have to go, let's say, to an engineer on your team or production person to get some of the output side. But yeah, it's really going to be kind of a key few contacts, and if we find that if there's somebody that's keeping it moving forward, then typically, it does, it can be completed within a week or a few days even. But yeah, if it sits there and it's not a priority, then it just keeps sitting there. But yeah, we'll hopefully be able to work through that. And once you get it, I know this is new information that but once you hopefully bounce it around internally a little bit, that you find that maybe this information's more accessible than you thought. Just it's not hadn't been something you looked at.
Right. Any additional questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you all. This is actually going to be very good for our industry, for your products. Help us recognize the importance of our products and how good they are from an environmental standpoint. And we think it's a great exercise and will only benefit the industry in the long run. So we appreciate your participation, and please do keep an eye out for communication from us about the details on how to get this started, deadlines, data sheets, NDAs, so on and so forth. And otherwise, if you have any questions outside of this call, think of something after the call, please send Mike and I an email or give us a call. You also see James's email up here. And have a wonderful holiday season. That's it. Anything
Awesome.
to close with, James? You're good?
No, just if anybody's wishing they were in a winter wonderland right now, we're getting about a foot of snow. I don't know if my camera's going to keep up with it.
Oh, geez.
So,
You
depending
can
on
have
your yeah, exactly. Depending on whether you're a skier or not, I guess, either a curse or a blessing. But no, it's really great. I look forward to talking with everyone. Yeah, hopefully get some of this data going, and you can start working on some data while you're doing your Zoom meetings and eating Christmas cookies here over the next few weeks.
Exactly. All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Have a Merry Christmas.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.
Take care,
Bye
everyone.
bye.